Sound healing and sound baths are not the same thing. It sounds like a small distinction, but it actually matters a lot, because one of them has been happening since before humans had language, and the other was invented about 50 years ago in California. So let's talk about both. Before we get anywhere near a crystal bowl or a yoga studio, let's talk about what sound actually does to the human body, because this is the part that makes everything that comes afterward make sense. The first sound you ever heard was your mother's heartbeat. You were floating in amniotic fluid in a dark, warm space, and the constant rhythmic thud of her heart was the soundtrack of your existence. That sound was associated with safety, with being held, with everything being okay. This is why babies calm down when you hold them against your chest. It's why white noise machines work. It's why there's an entire genre of music designed to mimic that frequency range. You were sound regulated before you were anything else. And that didn't stop when you were born. Your whole life, sound has shaped your nervous system in ways that you probably didn't notice. Think about how a song from high school can pull you back into a specific memory so fast it gives you whiplash. Think about how a jackhammer outside your window makes you irrationally angry within about 30 seconds. Think about how the sound of waves at the beach can make you feel like your shoulders are finally dropping for the first time in weeks. Think about how certain people's voices can make you feel safe, and other people's voices can make you feel like you need to leave the room. That's your autonomic nervous system responding to auditory input in real time. Human beings have known this forever. Before agriculture, before writing, before cities, people were carving instruments. You can't eat an instrument or hunt with an instrument. And the fact that prehistoric people spent hours making instruments tells you that sound mattered to us for reasons beyond survival. And every ancient culture we have evidence of harnessed sound in ways that affected how people felt. Indigenous cultures across every continent developed their own sound traditions. There's drumming, chanting, bone whistles, rattles, flutes. West African drumming traditions are so sophisticated they essentially function as a language. Aboriginal Australians play the didgeridoo. We have Siberian throat singers. In ancient India, the tradition of Nada yoga, the yoga of sound, goes back thousands of years. We have mantras, specific syllables believed to carry vibrational and spiritual power. Ragas, melodic frameworks that were associated with specific emotional states and times of day. They're still in use now. In ancient Egypt, priests used chanting and rattles called sistrums in temple ceremonies. Temples were built with acoustic chambers designed to amplify certain sounds. In China, traditional medicine connected specific tones to specific organs. The Chinese word for medicine shares roots with the word for music. The ancient Greeks had Pythagoras, who studied the mathematical ratios behind musical harmony and prescribed specific melodies for sleep, agitation, and emotional imbalance. Sound as a tool for shifting human states is one of the oldest things that we do. From a mother humming, to a group singing around a fire, to monks chanting in a cave, sound is ancient. It's real, and it affects us. So when people say humans have always used the power of sound, they're right. That is as old as we are. But it's not quite the same thing as sound healing, and definitely not the same thing as a sound bath. Sound healing as a formalized practice, and the sound bath specifically, are much more recent. And to understand why that's the case, you have to understand what was happening in California in the 1960s and 70s. In Big Sur, California in 1962, two Stanford graduates named Michael Murphy and Dick Price founded a retreat center called Esalen Institute on a stretch of coastline overlooking the Pacific. The idea was to create a space where people could explore what Aldous Huxley had called human potentialities. It was a laboratory for personal transformation, blending Eastern spiritual practices with Western psychology. Over the next decade, Esalen became the epicenter of what got called the human potential movement. And by the early 70s, there were 150 to 200 similar centers across the country, mostly in California. The ideas coming out of that scene were genuinely groundbreaking for their time. yoga and meditation began to be practiced by Americans. They learned about the mind-body connection. They brought breath work and Gestalt therapy to the people. The idea that you could do personal development as a lifelong practice became something real. A lot of what we now think of as standard mental health or well-being, which includes things like yoga classes and meditation apps, it all traces back to this period in Western history. This was also when a lot of Western seekers started traveling to India and Nepal and Tibet and bringing back mantras, meditation practices, singing bowls, and the general idea that Eastern traditions had something to teach the West about consciousness and healing. Some of that was genuine cross-cultural exchange. Some of it was appropriation. Most of it was a messy mix of both. At the same time, Western psychology was starting to take the nervous system seriously in a new way. Researchers like Herbert Benson at Harvard published work on what he called the relaxation response in the 1970s, showing that meditation and other practices produced measurable physiological effects. The vagus nerve was starting to be understood. Biofeedback became a thing. The idea that you could voluntarily shift your autonomic state was no longer mystical, it was becoming science. And all of this collided in Southern and Northern California in the 1970s. You had practitioners experimenting with every possible way to induce deep relaxation and altered states of consciousness. You had new instruments becoming available, and old ones being used in new ways. Folks like Don Corot experimented with playing large gongs for people lying down in therapeutic settings, with Richard Rudis trademarking the term gong bath. That was the early 1970s. So the sound bath wasn't invented from nothing. It emerged out of a specific cultural moment where people were actively searching for non-pharmaceutical ways to reach altered states, where Eastern traditions were being absorbed and often misinterpreted, where new instruments were made available, and where the science of the nervous system was starting to confirm what contemplatives have been saying for years. Someone was going to put all of these pieces together, and California is where it happened. So what is a sound bath actually doing to your body, and why do so many people swear by it as a form of sound healing or sound therapy? When practitioners talk about sound healing, what they're really talking about, whether they are conscious of this or not, is activating your parasympathetic nervous system. So let's break down what that actually means. Your autonomic nervous system has two main branches. The sympathetic side is your fight or flight system. This is where the heart rate goes up, breathing gets shallow, muscles tense, cortisol floods your system. It's useful in short bursts. The problem is that a lot of us are running in a chronically activated sympathetic state. So it's not full panic, but we're never really fully rested either. Emails, phone notifications, traffic, the news, the general ambient dread of being alive in a hyper-connected age, that all contributes to the exhausted but wired feeling that a lot of people are carrying around. The parasympathetic branch is the opposite. This is the rest and digest mode, where your heart rate slows down, blood pressure drops, breathing deepens, cortisol falls, and your body gets to do actual maintenance work. There are a bunch of different ways to activate the parasympathetic system. Long, slow exhales can really help. Cold water on your face, humming, singing, time in nature, meditation, going for a walk without a phone, being with people who feel safe to you. And yes, sound baths help activate the parasympathetic nervous system. Your brain has a job, and that is to always look for threats, always be scanning, always be processing. And when you're lying in a dim room and the only sensation is this soft, non-threatening sound, this resonant sound that you can't quite predict, your brain has to start to relax in its vigilance. It doesn't know what's going to come next, and that takes it off its guard. There's nothing to really respond to. The sustained tones don't have the structure of speech or a musical melody that you need to follow, so your analytical mind has less to do. Your breathing naturally starts to slow and deepen without you consciously doing anything, and your brain waves shift. In active thinking mode, your brain produces beta waves. As you relax, those shift toward alpha waves, and in deeper states, toward theta waves. This has been measured on EEGs during sound baths. It's the same kind of brainwave state that you get in meditation, in that hypnagogic moment right before sleep, or in deep creative flow. One of the buzzwords around sound baths right now is about vagus nerve stimulation. So let's talk a little bit about that. Real vagus nerve stimulation, the kind that treats epilepsy and depression, uses implanted electrical devices. The social media influencer version, whether it's humming or cold water or chanting, is framed as stimulating your vagus nerve, and that is often more marketing than actual measured benefit. When you hum to yourself, what's actually happening is you are lengthening your exhale, and the slow exhale is what drives the parasympathetic shift. The vibration in your throat and chest might add something, but the exhale is doing most of the work. When you're passively listening to gongs or bowls during a sound bath, the relaxation that you're feeling probably has more to do with slowed breathing and reduced threat perception and the meditative state than with any direct stimulation of a specific nerve. The nervous system is calming down. It's just that the mechanism isn't quite what the wellness culture often claims that it is. A 2017 study from UC San Diego ran 62 people through about an hour of singing bowl sound meditation and measured their moods before and after. They found that tension went down, anger went down, fatigue went down, as well as anxiety and depressed mood. The sense of well-being went up. It's worth knowing that this study gets cited a lot, partly because there just isn't much sound bath research out there yet. The sample was small, it was mostly women, and it was conducted at spiritual centers that attract people already open to the experience, and there was no control group. So take the specifics with a grain of salt, but the direction of the effect is consistent with a lot of other research on meditation and music therapy. So I think it's safe to say that sound baths do work. They do have real benefits. The question is exactly what, and how do we quantify it? And here's where I want to be really careful, because there's a spectrum of claims made about sound baths, and not all the claims are equal. On the strong end, we have solid evidence that sound baths induce the relaxation response, lower cortisol, increase heart rate variability, and shift brain waves towards more meditative states. They also seem to improve mood. These are measurable effects, though the research is still young and sample sizes are often small. There's also emerging evidence for some specific applications. Low-frequency vibration seems to help with chronic pain, particularly in conditions like fibromyalgia. Vibroacoustic therapy, which applies vibrations directly to the body, has shown promise in a few studies. Sound-based interventions have been used alongside conventional treatment in cancer care, post-surgical recovery, and anxiety management. That's the strong end. In the middle, we have claims that are plausible but not well studied. Things like sound baths supporting immune function, or helping with grief processing, or facilitating emotional release. These are reported by a lot of people who attend sound baths, and the mechanisms could make sense, but we don't yet have rigorous studies demonstrating them. So, could be real, could be placebo, could be the general benefit of an hour of rest just doing that work. And this is worth naming directly because a lot of what happens in a sound bath could be placebo mediated, and placebo effects are real physiological changes that are driven by expectation and context. So it's the ritual of it, the setting, the permission to stop and be for an hour, the practitioner's care, the group energy field. All of that is doing work alongside the sound itself. So it's really hard to separate what the sound does from what the experience of being in a sound bath does. And that's fine. The point is the nervous system downshifts. We don't need to pin down the exact mechanism for the benefit for it to be real. On the far end of the claims, we have things that get repeated a lot in the sound healing world but don't have scientific support, like sound repairing your DNA, or specific frequencies like 528 Hz having special healing properties. There's claims of sound realigning your cells at the molecular level, or specific notes balancing specific chakras. There's claims of a whole system of assigned frequencies that are supposed to correspond to spiritual or physiological functions. I'm not saying that these things have been disproven, because most of them haven't been rigorously tested. The research doesn't exist to say yes or no. What I'm saying is that there's no strong scientific evidence for them, and the proposed mechanisms don't have much physiological plausibility given what we currently understand about biology and acoustics. The specific frequencies claim is worth digging into though. The whole solfeggio frequency system, the 396 Hz, 528, 639 Hz, all of that was derived in the 1970s by Joseph Puleo, who said he arrived at the numbers through numerology applied to Bible verses. These are not ancient frequencies. And the idea that ancient Egypt's or Tibetan monks tuned their instruments to specific Hertz numbers is historically implausible, because consistent pitch standards didn't exist into the 20th century as far as we know. A = 440, which is the modern tuning standard, wasn't internationally agreed upon until 1939. Before that, instruments were tuned relative to each other, not to specific numerical frequencies. And different regions of the world use wildly different pitches. So the claim that a modern 528 Hz tone somehow matches what an ancient healer was playing doesn't really hold up to me. That doesn't mean that the 528 can't feel pleasant to listen to. Any frequency can feel pleasant in the right context. But I don't think it's fair to say it's an ancient sacred number. It's more of a 20th century invention that got marketed as rediscovered ancient wisdom. The honest version is this. Sound baths do reliable, measurable things to your nervous system. They also have layers of claim around them that range from probably true to probably made up to definitely marketing. You can enjoy the experience of a sound bath or using the power of sound healing while holding that complexity. And what I want you to actually take from this video is simpler than any of that. Your nervous system responds to sound. It always has, naturally. And you don't need to do anything fancy to tap into the power of that. Pay attention this week. Notice what sounds calm you and what sounds ramp you up. Try humming in the car. Put on rain sounds before bed. Sit outside and listen to the birds for 10 minutes. Sing in the shower. Find out what your nervous system wants. And tell me in the comments what sounds actually work to help you calm down and to regulate your nervous system. I'm curious about what you notice in your own body. And if you've been to a sound bath, let me know the impact that it has.